So how badly has the COVID-19 crisis messed up K-12 education in America? How are people coping with the need to teach their kids? And how will K-12 change as we reopen? These are the questions we're going to explore in today's Lighthouse Briefing Call from the Independent Institute. So our speaker today is Dr. Vicki Alger. Dr. Alger is a research fellow here at the Independent Institute, and she is part of the Institute's Center on Educational Excellence. I want to make sure that you know one key thing about Dr. Alger, and that is that she is the author of this quite remarkable book called Failure, the Miseducation of America's Children, published by the Independent Institute. You really ought to go to our website and take a peek at this great book, which diagnoses a lot of the problems in American K-12 education. So welcome, Dr. Vicki Alger.
Well, thank you so much, Graham. And I'd like to say thank you to all of our friends and supporters joining us today. It's really exciting to be here with you all.
It's great to have you. Dr. Vicki Alger is quite an expert on the subject, as you're going to hear as we get further into the story today. I wonder, do you mind if I call you Vicki, or you prefer Dr. Alger? What's good for you?
No, Vicki's fine. Please do.
Okay. Let's just say we're with a lot of our friends from around the country. We're in the family. Vicki, thanks for being here again. So you know a lot about what's going on in K-12 education, and you've been paying a special attention during this COVID-19 crisis. Can you just kind of give us a quick general review of what are the prospects for K-12 education going into the fall as the country recovers?
Well, absolutely. And I really liked how you set this issue up in your introduction, Graham. You said that how are we dealing with the crisis brought on by COVID? I would actually say that this is a crisis of the status quo's own making. Let's look at some of the things that are going on. Right now, we have millions of children across the country who are shut out from their schools because their schools can't cope with, providing remote learning. Now, this is a crisis for government-run schools, but if you look at online and private schools, particularly homeschooling moms and dads, this isn't a crisis at all. This is business as usual.
Right. They're used to it, right?
Absolutely. They roll with the flow. And I'm actually very excited for the prospects. I know there's a lot of gloom and doom out there. I see a lot of silver linings. The most important silver lining for me is that parents who would otherwise not consider education options, they move to their current neighborhood. Here's the public, the neighborhood district public school, and we're all set. Education, check that box. Now parents are seeing why educational options are so important as they see how their own children are learning at school. Because make no mistake, just because formalized government-run schooling is not occurring in many places, that doesn't mean children stop learning. So I'm excited for parents.
You mean to say, Vicki, that children can learn other than from government-authorized individuals?
Absolutely. I know. What a revelation. And it's obviously that's no news flash to any of us. But I think parents are rediscovering how important their roles are as their children's first educators. And they're seeing how their children learn in different ways. So when regular schools open up this fall, there's going to be, I think, a lot of consideration and a lot more demand for personalized learning options for their children. And I think that's very exciting.
Partly because during this crisis, there's been a lot of personalized learning going on, whether people intended it or not. And then they realize, hey, I can be involved in my kids' learning.
Yes, because for so long they were told because they're not education experts, which makes no sense, they should hand their children over to other people who have certificates and have gone to ed schools and so forth. That's not necessary. And I think that myth is being busted on a grand scale right now. And I think that opens up a lot of possibilities.
Wow, there's a lot of things to talk about here. From a public policy standpoint, which I'm always interested in, I wonder, can you comment on what the implications of the COVID crisis for K-12 education is for the teachers' unions, who have had a pretty central role in most people's learning, and suddenly the teachers' unions are sidelined? What effect will this have on the role of the teachers' unions in K-12?
Well, a lot of teachers' unions leadership are madder than wet hens right now, because they have, and they're putting on a really good PR campaign. For example, in places like Pennsylvania, Oregon, all the way up to Alaska and other states across the country,
Hmm.
teachers unions are trying to blame federal regulations for the failure of brick and mortar district public schools from being able to stay open and promote and provide online learning to their students. Well, that might look good on the nightly news reports or something, but here's the real story. There was a great article in the Federalist just a couple of days ago from two public school teachers in Pennsylvania, former union members,
Okay.
who kind of broke it all open and said teachers are being threatened to not provide online learning, to not post videos, and to be very careful about the communications you have with parents because they haven't renegotiated their contracts yet to allow for online learning. And what's coming out is that union leaders are actively opposing allowing virtual public charter schools to stay open because they're afraid that some officials have come right out and said, we're afraid if these children start attending these schools now, they won't come back to district schools. And what does that mean? Less money.
Lose funding allocated per capita from the state.
Right. If they don't have the students, they don't get those students funding. So follow the money, and you're going to see where all of these conflicts arise.
So those policies have created a financial incentive against personalized learning and parental choices.
Oh, well, absolutely. See, but money's still a means. Ultimately, in my opinion, unions want power and control over other people's children.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just the fact they don't just want power and control over, in any given state, K-12 education, likely the largest portion of the general fund budget. They want control over other people's children. Why? Because they think they know better than parents. They want to sort of socially engineer children to have the right kind of political and social values.
Right, that's for sure. Well, okay, here's one other thing comes to my mind. Over the recent years, I've been following some of these controversies regarding Common Core standards, and some parents may be fretting that because their kids have not been in the public schools during this period, that they're somehow going to fail to meet Common Core standards. Should they be worried, Vicki?
Absolutely not. The bar for Common Core standards is set so low they couldn't possibly do any worse.
Oh, okay, got it. So not to worry. They're probably already above that bar.
Oh, yeah, take that right off your worry list.
Okay. Somehow I thought that they had like these really super high Common Core standards that were so hard to meet, but I guess I had the wrong impression.
No, you've been reading the PR, and a lot of politicians in states across the country fell for the PR, and it was like Obamacare. You got to you got to pass the Common Core bills to know what's in the Common Core standards.
That sounds familiar from something else, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Well, so since a lot of children have been home and the parents are realizing that they keep on learning, one way or the other, they're learning, and parents are trying to engage, sometimes maybe with less delight than they might have expected or wanted, but they're still getting into it. This means that a lot of people are becoming de facto homeschoolers, at least during this crisis, and their attitude toward home education is probably going to shift a little bit because of that. Because it turns out, they've been doing it themselves for, some weeks, and it wasn't half bad. I noticed that you published this article, Parents Who Homeschool Are a Danger to Their Kids. That's what these academics think. This was published a couple of days ago in the Houston Chronicle, and I think 7 or 8 other newspapers around the United States. It is available, by the way, at independent.org. You can look this up and read it there also. So why did you write this article about like these crazy academics who think that homeschooling is a danger to kids? Why did you bother writing that?
Well, similar to what we've been talking about, this Harvard academic from Harvard Law School just had an article published in Arizona State University Law Review. And basically the greatest threat to children isn't a virus, it's their parents, particularly homeschooling parents. And here's why.
That's what she says.
Yes, that's what she says. Now, the reason why is if children do not go to government-run schools where you have certified teachers to teach them the right attitudes, values, toleration, and so forth, then our democracy is at risk. And this isn't a new argument. Education theorists like John Dewey and Horace Mann, the father of public education in America, have been saying this since the 19th century. But the problem is, for all the high sounding, lofty sounding talk about promoting democratic values, they use a decidedly undemocratic means of
Right.
forcing parents, particularly low income and immigrant parents, to send their children to schools so they're educated in the right way. Now, of course, this whole thing is ridiculous. And the attempts to portray homeschooling parents and increasingly grandparents too as some sort of nefarious lunatic fringe just doesn't square with reality. Homeschooling has exploded since the 1970s. It's gone completely mainstream. And the scientific evidence is clear and mounting that children do better academically. They have better, longer lifetime outcomes, including civic engagement, greater satisfaction with life. So across the board, homeschooling families are doing a bang up job. And if there's a problem in this scenario, it's public schooling monopolies.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. And it seems to me that with this crisis, which will gradually fade, God willing, as we go forward here, people's attitudes toward homeschooling are going to shift in a much more positive direction. They probably will be less persuaded by arguments like this professor from Harvard, and more interested in maybe they could explore it a little bit themselves. Do parents around the country have the ability to sort of dip their toe into homeschooling, or is it all or nothing, public education or homeschooling?
Well, really depends on what state you're in. For example, in California, parents have far fewer options. I'm right next door in Arizona, where parents are considered the freest among the world, in the country rather. I think there are a lot of things parents are going to start demanding because, let's face it, they're now in communication because voluntary co-ops and online chat boards. Parents across the country are talking with each other, giving advice. So, for example, let's say parents in California are talking with Arizona parents.
Right.
And people wonder why. How come you have education savings accounts and you can use your child's associated state funding and pay for tutoring, special education services, and really anything else you want? Yet in California, we still ration education based on where families can afford to live. So I think that's going to break down a lot of knowledge barriers. But I think the most important, another silver lining to COVID is that we tend to get into this all or nothing thinking, that because this option is good for my child, that's the only option that should exist for everybody else's children. I think people are going to have a lot more toleration for education options that may not work for their children, but really work well for other people's children.
If parents had more freedom to decide how their kids are going to be educated, there would be a whole lot more educational diversity. And diversity can often be a really good thing.
Oh, especially diversity of thought, approaches, and so forth, not the kind of, lockstep diversity we too often hear about in public schools and higher education. This is true diversity. And I think a lot of parents come this fall are going to have a lot more, number one, a lot more appreciation for other people's options. And I think they're going to be a lot more demanding about options for their own children.
Yeah, I'm sure that's true. Let me just take a quick pause here. For those around the country who are on the call with us, and I am able to see a participants panel. I see some friends from different parts of the United States who've joined in. Thanks for joining us, friends. If you want to ask a question of Dr. Vicki Alger, all you have to do is click on the participant button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and then you can raise your hand, quote unquote. And when you raise your hand, I'll see it, and then I'll unmute you, and you can ask your question to Dr. Alger. I don't leave everybody's mic open during the call because there'd just be a cacophony of sound. But if you want to ask her a question, please use that participant button to raise your hand. Or if you wish, you can also press the chat button at the bottom and write a little message in there, and then we will see it. Third way, you can also send your emailed questions, and I'll get them immediately if you send them to questions@independent.org. Questions@independent.org is your third way of getting a question. Okay, so I'm sure that a couple of our friends are going to be posing you some questions, Vicki, but in the meanwhile, I actually received some questions in advance, and let me just toss a couple of these your way that have been posed to me. The first question is, someone wrote in, one common concern is that teachers were trained to teach in person, and they may not have skills to teach virtually. Are school districts able to provide training so that teachers are able to properly teach in this new format?
That's an outstanding question. And that's something that, I've been looking at. And one thing I've been doing a little bit of research into is the fact that there have been federal and state programs to provide teacher training, online education provision for decades. And these programs, we have poured literally billions of dollars into these programs, and now we're being caught flat-footed. You look at places, for example, like the Florida Virtual School. This is one of the country's largest and oldest public virtual school provider in the country, and they offer nearly 200 online classes to over 200,000 students right now in Florida and across the country. So they've also offered to provide hundreds of free courses to anybody free of, in the state, free of charge. They're also partnering with the state to provide teacher training. And here's some exciting news. They have just contracted with the state of Alaska to create an Alaska virtual school.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the unions are pretty mad about that. But it's great. We don't have to wait, months to ramp up and get these schools going. Florida Virtual School has been doing it forever, and now they can just come in, provide their own teachers, their own curriculum, so student learning doesn't have to be interrupted anymore.
Mm-hmm.
The short answer is we shouldn't have had to wait. These resources have been available.
Exactly. That's so true. One of our participants just wrote me a quick note here saying, online teaching also is a headache for college professors of a certain age. Okay, well, that's for my friend Bill. I get that point, Bill. A good point. Kind of funny.
It can be, but it also opens up lots of opportunities.
Yeah, well, the thing is about, in K-12 education at least, what strikes me about the virtual interface thing is that it's best done in concert with and necessarily in cooperation with parents. And so there is that human contact that the parents always have and can arrange with others, even while they're also availing themselves of the virtual interface. It's not all or nothing. Like
exactly.
Just because you're going to use an online resource doesn't mean you have to put your kid in a room and close the door and never talk to them again.
No. And I think that's sort of all or nothing thinking is so indicative of an ossified monopoly. And what's exciting too is the fact that public school districts are now considering something that, we've been doing in the private sector forever. Flexible hours, blended learning. So you have a nice combination. By the way, these are practices that have been done through, in other countries in the world for years. So it shouldn't have had to take a virus to become innovative. But that's the nature of monopoly.
Yeah, well, again, silver lining. Let's, necessity is the mother of innovation, maybe, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so a reminder to our friends on the call, you can press that little participant thing, raise your hand. I'll recognize you for a voice question. In the meanwhile, one of our friends on the line, Jane, has just typed this question in. Jane asks, what proportion of the public school teaching corps consists of baby boomers near retirement? And what might be the implications of this demographic reality? That would be a vulnerable population in the virus era.
That's a huge question. Yeah. I don't have precise numbers at my fingertips.
Yeah, of course, right.
Certainly get those for you. But I will say it's very interesting that when you look at polls and survey data that break out responses between up-and-coming teachers, newer teachers, and veteran teachers, this makes perfect sense to, for example, millennials and Gen X teachers who grew up with technology. This is just part of everyday life. There's nothing scary about it. And they're also not afraid of education options, innovations. They want to be part of that innovation. This is why folks got into teaching in the first place. They don't want to do the sort of lockstep, same old stuff. They want to be, these are innovative people by nature. So I think certainly younger or newer teachers are part of a large portion of the teaching force.
Right.
The problem is that because our system has become so ossified that they can't innovate. So you see the return of newer teachers. So they last maybe 5 years and then they go out. a lot of these folks go out to found their own schools, their own curriculum. So they're contributing in other ways, but the system is really chewing these young, best and brightest teachers, chewing them up and kind of spitting them out.
Yeah, that's a shame. Of course, as to the so-called baby boom generation of teachers, no doubt there are quite a few of them. And I would say that would be a mistake to underestimate the ability of teachers, even of a certain age, shall we say, to actually be very versatile. I mean, teachers are professional learners themselves. And I suspect that many of that generation of teachers will be quicker than we realize to pick up all the virtual methods, which will be good because to the degree that they're more vulnerable, they'll be more protected. And I wouldn't be surprised if they step up to the plate really fast on virtual.
I think you're right. I'd agree with that.
So here's another question I got. Privacy issues are a big concern for many parents. How can parents safeguard the privacy of their kids? I guess this is in the context, of online stuff. Any thoughts on that, Vicki?
Oh, a lot of thoughts on that. First, don't presume that whiz-bang laptop or notepad or any other electronic device that your child has been given, quote unquote, free by the school is safe.
Right.
So you have to take, as always, we have to take common sense precautions. So first thing, you get that device out of the box and you can go online and find instructions. If you didn't get the instruction manual, you turn off the automatic settings and you set your own privacy settings. Right. What I would like to do, obviously we're not doing this now, and my husband's actually a computer engineer, and this is what we do with, you put a piece of tape over the camera. So right. There are also
it's easy. Watch, you can go like that.
Exactly. That's something that we do. Monitor what your children are doing. There are only certain times children can be, online. Confirm with your children's teachers that this is actually the assignment. Get rid of your browser history, your browser cache, all of those sorts of things. There are also, every state Department of Education should have a list of privacy rights. There are very strict regulations governing privacy.
Yeah, that's a good thing. It's a very good thing. And, it's important to realize, just as you wouldn't entrust your kid to somebody that you didn't know, neither should you simply entrust them to technology which you haven't gone through and carefully adjusted, because every manufacturer of both hardware and software has an incentive to set the default settings to auto scoop all the data they can. And so you just have to be mindful of that. Don't just assume that somehow the creators of the software had purely benevolent intentions. They did some auto setting, but they have to give you the freedom to change it to protect yourself at your own discretion. So use your discretion, protect yourself and your children.
Change the settings. Don't assume they're okay.
Yeah, but I mean, as I say, it's not really fundamentally different from in-person kinds of experiences, because again, you have to, you vet the character of the people you're going to put your kids with. You don't send them off with a stranger, obviously. It's just a different version of the same thing that parents for age-old millennia have had to deal with if they care and love their kids, which they do. So we have another question here. This one's about, I guess, mental health. The business of switching to online interfaces may be stressful for some students. Will students have access to counselors or advisors in this kind of environment? I don't know much about that.
Oh, well, that's another really good question. It's an important one. And the short answer is yes, absolutely. In fact, they are counselors and so forth are among sort of the emergency or first responders. What's also great is that there's so many more technological advances for children with special learning needs, whether they have particular disabilities, whether they're English language learners. There are all sorts of resources online. And again, we have paid billions of dollars over the past couple of decades for schools to implement and execute, even expand these programs. And just look at, even if you just watch TV and you see these commercials, isn't it amazing that there are services now where if you need psychological services, you want to talk to a counselor, there are private providers that will offer counseling, no matter where you are. So these sorts of time, geography barriers are just being broken all over the place. And, government schools are being, they're having to adjust. They should have adjusted before, but...
That's right. They're having to adjust by necessity. And, we're seeing some amazing silver linings. I mean, my takeaway from all this conversation with you today, Vicki, is essentially that out of the necessity of this virus situation with lockdown and remote learning and staying at home with your mother and father, people are sort of having their minds open to a variety of possibilities that they weren't aware of before. And that sense of the value and even the feasibility of parental involvement and parental decision-making in education is now enhanced in unexpected ways. I think that's great.
I do too. And I think what's also going to be interesting is come next fall, can you imagine a parent who's going to put up with 25, 30 kids in their children's class? I think the era of now, listen, the reality is great teachers, can have large classes, and Japan even uses very, very large classes. They think it's a good thing. However, parents are going to want more, American parents are going to want more personalized learning options, and they're just going to keep their kids at home if they're not happy, or they'll, do what they can to find other providers.
Yeah, maybe the reason, or at least one of the reasons why the Harvard professor in the Arizona State Law Journal published that piece, basically lambasting home education and calling for, lockdown and prohibition of it, presumptive prohibition, is precisely because that scholar sees the changing structure of incentives and perceptions resulting from this crisis, maybe felt the need to step out and take a swing at the thing which is suddenly becoming more viable in the eyes of millions of parents.
Yes. In fact, I think the last thing these Horace Mann or John Dewey types want is to go back to, for them, the bad old days of, the first 100 years of our republic, when this is exactly how education was provided. It was ongoing. It wasn't the strictly 8:30 a.m., 8:30 a.m. bell, and then you have 45 minutes to play, and all of this very regimented learning occurred all the time. And available evidence suggests that children, including disadvantaged children, our attendance rates were higher and their academic performance was even better than it is today.
Right. Amazing, huh? Okay, so we have time maybe for one or two more questions. Remember, you can raise your hand and I'll recognize you if you want to speak, but I did get another written question here. This is a really good one. With schools closed, will there be property tax rebates?
Oh.
And the question arises, especially in my mind, because, at the higher education level, colleges have sent the kids home, halfway through the semester, and parents have been demanding rebates on their payment of dorm and food costs, at least.
Yeah.
So if public schools are closed at K-12, are parents going to get property tax rebates? What do you think?
I think we start calling our representatives at City Hall. We start calling our representatives at our state capitals. And I think that's something that we should certainly ask. Now, here's where we're going to run, here's the fly in that ointment, though. Teachers and staff are continuing to be paid. A lot of states have issued orders, including California, that teachers will continue to be paid, because keep in mind, these contracts are approved, months ahead of the school year. Mm-hmm. So there may be some problems, but you know what? I know my insurance provider, my car insurance, a lot of other providers that we deal with every day and other aspects of our lives are providing rebates and so forth. I would definitely start calling, emailing, and getting friends and family to do the same.
Yeah, it's probably not going to happen. However, the mere fact that people are thinking about it will probably change the sense of balance of forces and incentives for the good in the long run. I was glad, by the way, to get my Allstate insurance $17 rebate the other day, since there's not as much driving going on. So yeah, it's a logical question. Thank you to the questioner who sent that question in. So here we're at the end of our time this morning. It's been a pleasure to have Dr. Vicki Alger talk with us about how the COVID crisis has affected K-12 education. And in spite of all that we may have feared, there are some good silver linings. Thank you for pointing those out, Vicki.
Happy to do so. And thank you so much for hosting this event, Graham.
It's a pleasure. And also let me thank all of our participants today, especially those of you who have been generous donors to the Independent Institute. Thank you. Keep up the good work. We have a lot of good things going on, even during and maybe especially because of this crisis. As a quick reminder, of course, you can always go to our website, independent.org, to get the latest on resources. Go to that website, top left, there's a button on COVID-19. You can see all of our materials on the crisis. Also at the top right, there's a donate button, and I encourage you to use that if you are so inclined to support our work. Thanks again from the Independent Institute, and thanks to Vicki Alger.